Hello, leaders. We are talking today about our Bible lesson for March 27th. I got really close, sorry. March 27th, and we are in week 2 of our Hall of Shame. And this one is King Saul. All right, so we'll remember just briefly from last week, we talked about Lot's wife and how she clung to her life in the way she missed that place where she grew up and she lived and she was from. And so she looked back to Sodom after she'd been given the direct instruction not to. And that ended with her as a pillar of salt, which is weird and deadly. And so we talked about making sure that we rely on God, and that as we are repenting and turning our back on things that we're turning away from poor choices and habits and things like that, we want to turn towards God and not look back. You got to leave that behind, right? So today we're going to talk about King Saul. And what decision did Saul make that was so bad, right? He was Israel's first king, and sometimes we talk about him in a good way, and sometimes we talk about him in a bad way. And there was one particular decision that started all of the stink, okay? And that's where we're going to land today. So we're going to start reading in 1 Samuel. Ring any bells? Yeah, this is Hannah's son, who is now an adult. He's actually an old man. And this is what's happening, okay? 1 Samuel 8, chapter 8, verse 4 is where we're starting. So all the elders of Israel gathered together. They came to Samuel at Ramah. They said to him, "You are old. Your sons do not live as you do, so appoint a king to lead us. We want a king just like the kings all the other nations have." Pause. Hannah's son Samuel, he's old, he's married, he has adult sons. He has evidently lived his whole life as a prophet of God. He has been godly. In another verse that we can see, he asked the people, he's like, "Have I ever done anything that was against you? Is there a reason?" And they're like, "Nope, you're great and you're honorable and all of that. But your sons do not worship God and follow God the same way that you do." Just like we talked about, Eli's sons did not, even though they were priests, they did not honor God and love God the way that Eli did. And so this is just kind of a reminder too that we have to make our own choices about what we believe about God and whether we're going to follow him or not. Whether we're born into it or not, we have a choice to make. So the Israelites want a king. All the neighboring countries have kings, and Samuel is the one that they look to as the spokesperson from God to them, but he's getting old, he's going to die, and they don't feel like they can trust his sons to honor God and be a good leader in that way. So they say, "Nope, we want a king. We want a king on earth, just like the other guys have kings. And yeah, we know God's supposed to be our king, but we want a human one." Samuel is ticked. He's like, "This is not right, guys. God is our king. God is your king. God's going to continue to be your king." And they go, "Nope." And God tells him, he goes, "Let it go. Let it go. They're gonna continue to rebel against me. They've always rebelled against me. It's not going to be as great as they think it's going to be, but let it go, right? Anoint the king and we'll move forward. Just listen to me for instructions." Samuel says, "Dude." He doesn't. I said that. He says, "Okay." So now we're going to pick up in chapter 9, verse 2. Kish had a son named Saul. Saul was a handsome young man. He was more handsome than anyone in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. The Lord had spoken to Samuel. Now skip to 15, sorry. The Lord had spoken to Samuel the day before Saul came, and he had said, "About this time tomorrow I will send you a man. He is from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him to be the king of my people Israel. He will save them from the power of the Philistines. I have seen how much my people are suffering. Their cry for help has reached me." Again, we have people crying out and God listening. 17. When Samuel saw a man coming toward him, the Lord spoke to Samuel again. He said, "He is the man I told you about. His name is Saul. He will govern my people." Saul and his servant were served a very nice meal. They spent the night there with Samuel. There's a whole lot of extra meaning in all of this. This is totally a passage that you could read for yourself and get all the details out of, because there's some pretty fascinating stuff. But we're going to look at that another time. We're going to continue with verse 27. As they were on their way down to the edge of town, Samuel spoke to Saul. He said, "Tell the servant to go ahead of us." So the servant went on ahead. Then Samuel continued, "Stay here for a while. I'm going to give you a message from God." Chapter 10, verse 1. Then Samuel took a bottle of olive oil. He poured it on Saul's head and kissed him. He said, "The Lord has anointed you to be the king of his people." Then Samuel goes on to tell Saul some things that would happen on his journey back home so that he would know that this was all true. And those things all happened exactly that way. So we're going to fast forward a little bit to where all of the Hebrew tribes, the nation of Israel, are gathering to pick a king. And the way they were doing it is they cast lots and to figure out which tribe it was supposed to be. That it was like the priest had the Urim and Thummim, and it was these things they would roll, and it would pick it's all, we don't understand it. It worked. It's the way God spoke to them then. All right. You can read more about that too. So the tribe of Benjamin is called forward. The lots say Benjamin. And then verse 21. Next, he had the tribe of Benjamin come forward, family group by family group. So let's say that's like if we were somewhere and the Michael Guillory family gets chosen. That's my dad. Okay. So all of us who are related to Michael Guillory would step forward, right? And then they were casting lots to pick which family within the Michael Guillory family. Is it the Keenan Guillory family? Is it the Kevin Houston family? Or is it the Corey Pepitone family, right? And so they cast lots and they picked, it would show which of those family members. Oh, it's the Corey Pepitone family. And so all the members of my family would then step forward, and then they cast lots again, and the lot would say, oh, it's Ella Pepitone. And Ella would have stepped forward, and that's where we are. Ready? Finally, Saul, the son of Kish, was chosen. But when the people looked for him, they realized he wasn't there. They needed more help from the Lord. So they asked him, "Has the man come here yet? Did he not arrive with everybody else on time? Did he have the date wrong?" And the Lord says, "Yes, he's there. He has hidden himself among the supplies." So they ran over there and they brought him out. When he stood up, the people saw that he was a head taller than any of them. That's pretty fancy. Samuel spoke to all the people and he said, "Look at the man the Lord has chosen. There is not anyone like him among all the people." Then the people shouted, "May the king live a long time." That long live the king. Okay. Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he ruled over Israel 42 years. Did you hear where Saul was when they were casting lots to figure out who was supposed to be king? Saul knew he had already been anointed as king. Samuel knew who was supposed to be king. They're doing this so all the people can see it happen, right? Saul's hiding. Does that seem like kingly behavior to you? No, not to me either. So there's some stuff that happens and time goes on, and he does get braver. But we're going to skip to chapter 13 and start at verse 3. There have been some battles. There have been some victories. He's getting braver. Some Philistine, you pick, soldiers were stationed at Geba. Jonathan attacked them. The other Philistines heard about it. Saul announced, "Let the Hebrew people hear about what has happened." And he had trumpets blown all through the land. So all the Israelites heard the news. They were told, "Saul has attacked the Philistine army camp at Geba. Now the Philistines can't stand the Israelites." The Israelites were called out to join Saul at Gilgal. So they had a good battle. It went well. So they decide to go further and go forward on that, because Jonathan's battle went really well. Remember, Jonathan is Saul's son. He eventually becomes David's best friend. The Philistines gathered together to fight against Israel. They had 3,000 chariots and 6,000 chariot drivers. Their soldiers were as many as the grains of sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash. It was on the east of Bethaven. The Israelites saw that their army was in deep trouble. So they hid in caves. They hid among bushes and rocks. They also hid in pits and empty wells. Some of them even went across the Jordan River into the lands of Gad and Gilead. So the Israelite army sees the Philistine army, which is enormous. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of them, and they have chariots with horses and 2 chariot drivers per chariot in case one gets killed. They still have another one. And they're terrified. So, like their king did a while back, they hid and they ran away. Saul remained at Gilgal. All the troops with him were shaking with fear. He waited 7 days, just as Samuel had told him to. But Samuel didn't come to Gilgal. He was waiting for Samuel to come and make offerings to God on his behalf for the victory of the army. And Samuel had said, I'll be there in 7 days. So he waits the 7 days. But Samuel didn't come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. Like they're just too scared. So he said, bring me the burnt offering and the friendship offerings. Then he, Saul, offered up the burnt offering. Just as Saul finished offering the sacrifice, Samuel arrived. Saul went out to greet him. So he's doing something that only the intercessor between God and the Israelites is allowed to do, right? That's Samuel's job. Samuel has said, wait on me. Obviously, God is testing Saul because they're scared, and God is giving them the reminder of, who's the king of Israel? Saul or me, right? But the people are terrified. And Saul is getting nervous because he's the king and his army's running away. And he's like, okay, let me just make the offerings. We love God. We're going to honor God. We're going to do all of that. I'm going to do the offerings so that the army will stop running away and we can go ahead and go to battle, because waiting is killing everybody, right? Making everybody too scared. Samuel asks a question. What have you done? Saul replied. I saw that the men were scattering. I saw the Philistines were gathering together in Michmash. You didn't come when you said you would. So I thought, now the Philistines will come down and attack me at Gilgal, and I haven't asked the Lord for his blessing. So I felt I had to offer the burnt offering. You have done a foolish thing, Samuel says. You have not obeyed the command of the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have made your kingdom secure over Israel for all time to come. But now your kingdom will not last. The Lord has already looked for a man who is dear to his heart. He has appointed him king of his people. That is because you have not obeyed the Lord's command. So Samuel's telling Saul, dude, you got in the middle and you did something that wasn't your job to do. You made the sacrifices to God. And because you did that, your family's no longer going to be king. God would have protected your family and all of that would have happened, the nation, all of that. But you took on a job, a God job that wasn't yours to take. And the consequence is your family's not going to continue being king. It's gone. Saul got scared. He started making decisions that he thought were best, he thought were smartest. The offering needed to be made. He was right. That did need to happen. But it wasn't his job to do. And so Saul was clinging to his life. He was clinging to his kingship. He was clinging to what made sense to him instead of trusting God to take care of it. And what happened? There were consequences much larger, right? The consequences didn't happen to just King Saul. King Saul didn't die right then. King Saul didn't have something bad happen to him right then. His son, his future children, his grandchildren, they lose the kingship. It's not going to stay in their family now. It's going to David. Not yet. There's going to be more stuff that happens before then. But he seals the fate of himself and Jonathan. They're both going to die in battle instead of living, and instead of Jonathan becoming king. Those things are gone. This battle is not going to go the way that it would have gone because he got impatient and did not trust God. So eventually David becomes king. And Jesus comes from the line of David. Therefore, there is a king from the line of David on the throne for all eternity. Did David always make right choices? No way. He made some pretty rotten choices. But when he realized what his bad choices were, he confessed and he repented. We don't really see that from Saul. We don't see Saul saying, I'm sorry. We see Saul giving excuses. But we don't see him saying he was sorry and taking responsibility. Today's activity is Willow in the Wind. It's similar to a trust fall, or it is a type of trust fall. So that'll be our physical group. You're going to have the kids stand in a pretty tight circle, kind of shoulder to shoulder with their arms like this, with one child in the middle who's going to stand stiff, knees locked, back straight, and kind of roll, and that was close again, roll around the circle, right? Because it takes trust to follow God. And generally God has us working with other people, not by ourselves, just like Saul had to work with Samuel. He had to trust Samuel and he had to trust God. Our creative group, we have heart puzzles, and so the kids can decorate those and write Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 on them, color them, whatever they need to do as a reminder of trusting God with all their heart, right? That God will make their path straight and will honor that when we trust him and when we wait for him and we walk in his way. So that is this week's lesson. And thank you so much for loving kids and leading kids and understanding that we are impacting eternity when we do this. All right, thanks, friends.